1 minute after 10 o'clock. We'll go ahead and open up our special session today. Please silence and shut off your cell phones and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Allison, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alright, today's special session is on Blue Marmot Goal Exception Decision. The original, this is a consolidated application of file 21-052-CP and 21-053-CP. The purpose of the meeting today being that public comment is closed and the record is closed. We will be making a determination hopefully at the conclusion of this meeting for either an approval or denial of the application. So with that, Jim Bailey, is there anything that I'm kind of leaving out as far as the process here today?
The only thing I would point out is that, of course, we had meetings for public comment and rebuttal and response. That my recollection is we had about 6 hours of that, maybe a little bit longer. The public comment has been received, additions and supplement to the record has been received, and today's process is to make a decision on the application. And the board can decide to approve the application with conditions, deny the application, or remand to the Planning Commission for additional information or investigation. If you deny the application, then Blue Marmot has the right to appeal to LUBA to determine whether or not the denial was appropriate. If you approve the application with conditions, then those conditions could also be the subject of an appeal to LUBA. However, if you deny without any conditions, then conditions are not going to be considered in the future. In other words, if you deny, then the denial is what will be considered by LUBA. If you approve with conditions, then that approval with conditions will be considered by LUBA. But you can't deny and place conditions at the same time.
Thank you. All right, Darwin, any notes from you?
I don't believe so. If you have any questions for me, though, I'll glad to answer them.
All right, perfect. So I'll just turn it over to the Board of Commissioners. If there's any comments, anywhere we'd like to go, we have a final rebuttal from the applicant. Floor is open for discussion. Just get us rolling, I suppose. We do have recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, 4 of them to be exact, from the Planning Commission for our consideration. Just wanted to point that out. The Planning Commission gave us 4 points. They wanted to make sure that the applicant agree with the county road superintendent to a road usage agreement. They also pointed out that lighting of the facility and substation be shielded downward so that to reduce the visibility of the project by surrounding property owners. They also requested that the applicant work with the County Board of Commissioners on a SIP agreement, or I suppose a pilot, to benefit the local schools. And also finally, that the applicant work on a community partnership plan to address concerns from the public because of the project. And those were 4 points that they left as recommendations to us. We can adjust or expound upon those as we see fit. Thoughts?
I think we have a few additional questions that we'd like to discuss.
From might contribute to those conditions, or just questions in general?
Questions in general or questions that may lead to a decision.
Okay.
Commissioner Albertson, do you want me to go first or you?
Yeah, you can go first if you want, I don't care.
I'll just be real general and I was kind of anticipating that you'd be answering what I'm asking, Logan, but I guess you don't have to answer it at this time. We've driven the perimeter and looked at the site and whatnot. One thing that maybe wasn't talked about as much in the previous discussions was the right-of-way leading to the power plant or the deal down here on Stock Drive Road. You're going to go through county and also kind of Lakeview right-of-way, etc. I noticed when looking at the right-of-way, it varies quite a bit. There's instances where the power poles are actually in the ditch. We know that the prison that's up there also has geothermal, bear in mind. They also have power and whatnot buried there. Water, sewer. It's pretty jammed up in places, and a little concerned about where you really anticipate the right-of-way being throughout phases of the route down Roberta and particularly out on the county road, just off the hill there, the Rabbit Hill Road.
Yeah, I'll answer briefly. We are aware of the constraints as well. Because of that, we did something that's a bit unusual for our projects, which is conduct a feasibility study with an outside engineering contractor just to make sure it was possible to route down the road right of way from the PV site to the substation. They deemed that there is a feasible route with which to do that. Our plan is to use that routing as a recommendation for our final engineering, and that final engineering would be included in the right-of-way permit that we would need from the county, and also the conditional use permit we would need from the town.
Does that include being right next to the road?
Our guidance from the town has been to stay as far out or from the town and the county has been to stay as far out to the edge of the right-of-way as is possible, and we are aiming to do that as much as possible.
Does that include buried and hanging?
Our entire plan is to have everything underground.
Is that feasibility study part of the record?
It is part of internal, I do not believe it is currently part of the record, but our plan is to use that and our final engineering to inform both the discussions with the county about a right-of-way permit as well as the road use agreement.
And Darwin, just to confirm, we have Paul and Tim, I believe, on Zoom, so they might be able to answer some of these questions as well.
I guess on the right-of-way thing, I mean, you have it in your land use context from Jacobs. But it mostly talks about the 800 feet off of Stock Drive. But I guess I'm having a little trouble with why isn't that in your plan?
The engineering study?
Because, I mean, we don't even have an agreement with you.
Right. Well, the conditional use permit, and Max, correct me if I'm off here, is for the ability to use the site in general, and then we will need to acquire a right-of-way permit with the county that includes final engineering, so that would be included
Yeah,
in.
but the right of way, the transmission line is part of the site development.
Right.
And so why haven't that been taken care of? Why hasn't
I
that
would
right
say-
away be-
I would say similarly to how the PV site can, the solar site can and needs to be adjusted with final engineering. There were not final engineering plans in this permit application, and so those plans will be included in the necessary permits, but this permit does not require final engineering.
How can that be? How can the permit not include final engineering? Cause won't know what's going on out there.
Well, that we would have to operate and construct within the constraints set by this permit. And so this permit sets an area within which we can construct. And then the building permits, right-of-way permits will require final engineering that is absolute specific about where we would put all of the infrastructure. Maximum.
Yeah, that's correct. It's a approval to site the project as proposed with any conditions that the board deems acceptable, and then just the same as with state or federal permits, the applicant, and this is very typical for development, goes and gets those permits in compliance with applicable law after the conditional use permit has been issued. It's standard mode of operation so that we can be sure that the project is viable and permitted by the county. And we need to take that probably to the other agencies that will review applications for things like right-of-ways, the NPDES permit, things like that.
So in your feasibility study, there is room,
Yeah,
there is space.
there is a way to route underground, yes.
Because we also got a ditch on Stock Drive Road
Mhm.
that doesn't leave for a whole lot of room either.
Right. Yeah, and the for Stock Drive specifically, one, there is engineering that has shown that it's feasible to route in that right of way, and two, there's a chance we may be acquiring a private easement that would not require us to be in that right of way.
Any other questions, guys?
The right of way, I believe you are correct that the right of way permit and everything else comes after you actually acquire permission to even go through with the process as far as the conditional use permit is concerned. But one of the things that I just want to point out for the record, and I think that this would be something that could even potentially end up being a condition of approval if it were to be approved, that the right of way and the construction during that process stays, all track vehicles stay off of our county roads. I know this has been something that, we've made sure was very clear based on my conversations with our road superintendent, and also the fact that our shoulder and the shoulder of the county road itself is not impacted in any way. We had an incident on Stock Drive, I know you're aware of, where our entire shoulder was ground away within months after we had just put a brand new surface on that entire road. And now that whole shoulder was just ground off and completely gone, so that so someone could put a utility basically within that shoulder. And so we want to avoid anything like that within our county, or any impacts like that on our county roads. And it is a part of our ordinances as well, that track vehicles are not allowed on county pavement. So, and as well as digging the ditches and everything else, putting the dirt and so forth on the county road is not acceptable. That was my thoughts, at least what we were talking right of way.
Darwin, I believe Tim and Paul may have had some comments, but weren't sure how to participate. Are they muted or?
You know,
Can you promote them to panelists?
Is it more options or more? There you go.
Paul, you're good to go. Who else did you say? Paul
Tim?
and oh, there, sorry. Paul, do you have any comments for us, or Tim?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, good morning. This is Paul Salo, applicant engineer with Jacobs. I just wanted to make the point that the land use application and all of the supporting studies contemplated and analyzed the collector line all the way from the solar array site to the substation. So, you know, I think I heard the comment that we weren't sure if that was included in the application, but that was studied, all of the background technical studies that were done contemplated the right of way as proposed, and it is analyzed throughout the application. I'd be happy to point you to specific sections or maps, if that would be helpful.
Could you actually do that real quickly, just while we're on that topic? Where
Yeah,
exactly in the record is that?
So in the main application, you will find a tab that says application narrative. And on page 2-3, which is the project description, that's the first place you will find text describing the specific right-of-way and path proposed for the collector lines. Down to the specific, lengths of the collector line, tax lots crossed. That's the first instance of a description of the collector line. And it is throughout the compliance section of that same document, all of the criteria that require demonstration of compliance with, we included responses, again, contemplating use of the rights of way as proposed. And then the last thing I'll point out to you is in Appendix A to the application, where all of the maps and figures are. If you just flip through, you will see that collector line right of way proposed for use is shown on the various maps. It was included in the soils analysis that's wrapped in the Goal 3 exception request, where that right of way crosses through the A1 and A2 zones. So it was fully baked into this application. You'll see it on figure 1 of Appendix A, which is a vicinity map, and I realize the scale isn't great there. You will see it on figure 3 in Appendix A. You'll see the yellow line with a label or a tag showing that that's the 34.5 kilovolt collector line right away proposed, and so on and so forth throughout those figures. So I don't know if that's helpful. I just wanted to point out that is absolutely baked into this application.
Yeah, and leading back to my original question, we saw the pictures on the maps, we see where the line would go. I think everybody studied that. Just didn't know if there's physically space there.
Good morning, Commissioners.
How far we looked at that.
Tim McMahon, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, thanks for the opportunity to participate. Morning to you all. Commissioners, thank you for being back again. Mr. Bailey, good to see you. I would just add just a little bit more detail here in that it is absolutely commonplace for the applicant's engineers to work with public works or road departments after conditional use permits are issued in order to ensure that the county's control and design and capability of right-of-way is secured and can be secured with engineering stamps to make certain that there's no disruption or harm done to the right-of-way. We certainly understand that, and would encourage, if you wish to do so, to impose a condition to ensure that kind of collaboration between the project engineer and your team, and even maybe third-party engineers, if you need to engage a third-party engineer, that's fair game. So it is appropriate and common for you as decision makers to ask these questions, and they are very important questions, and we want to make sure that we provide the engineering to ensure that this is all developed to your satisfaction.
One thing I would like to point out, going really quickly over to the monitoring plan, there was some confusion on our end, and I just want to make sure that we touch on this for the sake of the record, that the habitat mitigation area, as we can see in the actual CUP application under section 6 of the monitoring, the applicant or designated third party will protect, enhance, and maintain the habitat mitigation area for the useful life of the project, estimated at 35 years, or duration of impacts. There was some concern, I think, in the prior meeting due to some comments, and also maybe just on our part. I think Darwin Johnson and I have had some discussion wanting to make sure that habitat mitigation area is only for the lifetime of the project and does not extend beyond that. And also just pointing that out for any future mitigation plans that I personally as a commissioner am not in favor of habitat mitigation areas being a permanent easement for long-term periods.
Yeah, Commissioner Williams, Tim McMahon again.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. There was a little bit of confusion, I think, from John Muir at the hearing, that kind of toward the end of the hearing, and I think that did make it a little bit murky. So, yes, we agree, we understand that, and we will certainly work with the county to ensure that the terms of the conservation easement expire at the termination of the project. If, particularly if that's the county's interest and concern, that's understandable, that would allow the project to be, the property to be returned back to rural agricultural use.
Right. I think it's difficult enough for us to see land being repurposed to where it can't be grazed and utilized in that kind of an agricultural fashion, and then to see it being locked up permanently as part of a mitigation plan that for a project that may or may not even be in existence still is that's a hard pill to swallow, and it's not a policy that we want to use or set as a preference in Lake County.
Yeah, that's quite understandable. I would also say the conservation easement itself is not at present negotiated. It's agreed to in concept in the HMP. There are conservation plans depending upon the circumstances in the locality and how ODFW thinks about it. But there are definitely CEs out there that I've certainly worked on that allow for some modest and controlled grazing within the site. It would really depend on kind of the characteristics of this area and what the ambitions are with ODFW to kind of to provide enhancement or uplift in habitat. But I guess I just want to point that out because, again, the conservation easement is not at this time negotiated, and the county's input in that, in terms of any potential mixture of uses that would both allow for, mitigation for habitat purposes, but potentially also allow for some modest and appropriately controlled grazing is something that I think can be on the table. I hate to impose it ask that you impose it as a condition, because it's just kind of a bit of an unknown right now because we haven't taken that step yet with ODFW. Thanks.
You have something, Commissioner Albertson?
Yes, so there hadn't been discussion about the right of way with the commissioners nor the town of Lakeview. That hasn't been done yet. The conservation easement isn't in place yet. The two things we've talked about so far in few minutes that we've been here haven't been completed. Going back to the dual use OAR 660-033-0130, section 38. It says dual use development means the developing the same area for land for both the photovoltaic solar generation facility and for farm use. And later in your guys' plan, it says that you're not gonna allow that. We've talked over and over again about our culture and about farm use and how important it is to us. And I don't know why you guys didn't make it so we could meet that goal. Is it okay if I just carry on with
Yes, absolutely.
some of my questions?
And the questions, just for clarification, I wanna try and make sure that they're not submitting additional testimony or additional information, but yeah, you go right ahead. If there's
Well,
information that
I'm
isn't
going off
included,
of their
I think it just has to
land
be
use
noted.
context.
Right.
This is all in there that Jacobs did, their land use context.
Okay.
That's the number one thing. I'm having a little trouble with the soil classification. Section 3. It says that nothing's been ever cultivated, no crops were ever grown. 3.23 soil classifications. They're just going that it wasn't irrigated. It states that there's no high value farmland and that the project site is proposed on soils that are predominantly non-arable. But over on your table on 3-1, it says that 266.1 acres are arable and 308.7 acres are non-arable farmland. If you turn the page, you state that 59.6% is non-arable farmland, and that's not true. It's 0.536.
53 points.
Yeah, 53.6%. So the problem I'm having with this is that you're using the arable farmland to site your solar, and your non-arable, according to your map, is where your wildlife mitigation is. And so you're using the best property to actually set your solars on.
Is there
I'll have some, okay, I'm just getting there.
I was just wondering if you had any questions within that, have that clarified based
Commissioner, would you like a response from us on this issue of predominance and characterization of the soils?
Sure.
Because many sites are blended soils, the way the law works is a pure percentage. If it's mostly one type of soil versus the other, it's considered predominant and therefore is treated as that predominant soil type. Here, this is predominantly, as a matter of percentage, it is predominantly non-arable land and therefore treated as non-arable land and considered non-arable land. And I don't know how much further clarification I can provide to that. That's how we design the project. That's how it's kind of addressed, I mean, everywhere in Oregon, with energy facilities and other land uses that have a blend of soil types. Predominance is the test, which equates to characterization as, in this case, as non-arable land.
On the first paragraph of the goal 3 exception, it says, which is OAR 660-015-0003, to preserve and maintain agricultural lands. Agricultural lands shall be preserved and maintained for farm use consistent with existing and future needs for agricultural products.
Commissioner, do you mind if I?
No, hop
Step
in
in.
whenever you want.
Okay, so at our last public meeting, I thought one of the bits of information that we got from the public that we hadn't heard before, that is part of this project that I have questions about, came from Jack Vernon. And Jack Vernon is the currently leases the property. He has for the last 19 years. It has between 200 and 250 AUMs, which for those of you that are savvy on the AUM math, that's about 100 head for 2 months. He's been using that property, and I think other ranches have used that property in the past as well. It's the combination of arable and non-arable lands that make the browsing and the feed there available for cattle and for wildlife. We heard from Mr. Vernon that he farmed the land back in the day for Mr. Coyne Plato, and that they planted it to pasture, dryland pasture. So if you get to the Lake County Zone and Ordinance 24.19C, talks about agriculture lands, and in there, I'm not probably stating this quite right, but I guess where I don't feel in agreement is that the land generally is unsuitable for production of livestock. And I can agree that, putting it into permanent dryland pasture was the best thing for that piece of ground. Growing up on a farm ranch myself, that's probably the best suited for that land. But if you've got 2 months for 100 head of cattle, and they are piecing together properties that they're going to feed their cattle throughout a year, 2 months is a big deal for 100 head of cattle.
Yeah.
And for us to say that it has no effect or is only 0.081 of the lands that are grazed in the Lakeview area, I have a hard time finding out how that number came together. So I'm also looking at 5.1.1 of agriculture lands within the Jacobs Plan. I'm having a hard time agreeing with it because you can't rule out livestock here. I'm not hanging my hat so much on farm use. I mean, nobody's gonna go to the bank on alfalfa right there or a wheat crop or anything like that. I think it would have been done in the past if it was possible or if it made sense economically. But right now we're displacing a rancher for 2 months for 100 head of an opportunity for grazing for his cattle. And that is an impact.
Six 660-033-0310 HA. The proposed photovoltaic solar power generation facility will not create unnecessary negative impacts on agriculture operations conducted on any portion of the subject property not occupied by the project components. Negative impacts could include, but not limited to, the unnecessary construction of roads, dividing a field or multiple fields in a way that creates a smaller isolated piece of property that are more difficult to farm, and placing photovoltaic solar power generation facility project components on lands in a manner that could disrupt the common and accepted farming practices.
You know, we keep talking about farming, but keeps trying to draw everything back to farming, but farming isn't the real driver here of the economy here in Lakeview for that particular piece of ground. It's livestock, and I am struggling to see that was sufficiently met.
Later on in that same number, it says the proposed site is better suited to allow a continuation of existing commercial farm or ranching operation on the subject tract than other possible sites also located in the subject tract, including those comprised of non-high value farm soils.
So Mr. Vernon stated that not only did it support his 100 head for 2 months, or however he chose to use it, it also supports 75 to 100 head of antelope along with it. So what it tells me is arable and non-arable lands can not only support 100 head of cattle, but also can support a varying amount of wildlife throughout 12 months of the year.
Since we're on the wildlife, mitigation plan pushes the antelope out to Highway 395 to the east, Thomas Creek Road to the north, or Rabbit Hill Road. It'll funnel them in there due to the fencing. And I have a big concern that we're going to have many vehicle to animal collisions increase in that. It's definitely going to cause some antelope and deer to lose their lives, and I just don't want any people to lose their lives because of it.
So commissioners, while you're thinking, let us know if, as you're speaking through, there's anything we can talk through, listening to your observations, if there's any input you'd like from the applicant or anything we can clarify.
Maybe this would help a little bit, just because this meeting is mainly for discussion amongst ourselves, we can just kind of, speak into the mic, but we are talking amongst each other, kind of working through some of our thoughts. But if we have specific questions for the applicant, direct them towards the applicant, maybe that would help alleviate the awkwardness that you guys might feel. Like, am I supposed to answer that? Am I supposed to give a comment?
Thank you.
But yeah, specific questions, maybe that would help if we direct them towards them, but other than that, we can just kind of make it more like we're talking amongst each other. But it's really good points to bring out for the record.
Also in that same number, thank you, I'm gonna continue.
No, go for it, you're good.
It states that for arable lands, which is 50%, a little over 50%, or excuse me, 40 something percent.
There's a lot to read here.
(46.2%) is arable lands. And in the rules, it says for arable lands, a photovoltaic solar power generation facility shall not use, occupy, or cover more than 20 acres. The governing body or its designee must find that the following criteria is satisfied in order to approve a full photovoltaic power generation facility on arable land.
Commissioner Albertson, could you point out exactly where that was again?
Gotta get back. So under the minimum standards, 660-033-10130.
Under the minimum standards.
And it's under H.
H in the application.
H under the minimum standards.
Oh, what is that document that you have there, just so clear?
I copied all of the ones that I thought applied.
Oh, okay, alright,
So this is my own doc.
that's just your copy, okay. The minimum standards under our comprehensive plan, I mean,
This OAR rule.
this is the OAR rule,
660.
okay. Perfect.
Under ORS 496.012, wildlife policy. I don't see where this project meets any of these. I'm gonna read them to you. It is the policy of the state of Oregon that wildlife should be managed to prevent serious depletion of any endangered species or provide the optimum recreational and aesthetic benefits for present and future generations of citizens of this state. In furtherance of this policy, the State Fish and Wildlife Commission shall present the public interests of the state of Oregon and implement the following co-equal goals of wildlife management. To maintain all species of wildlife at optimum levels, to develop and manage the lands and waters of this state in a manner that will enhance the production and the public enjoyment of wildlife, to permit an orderly and equitable utilization of available wildlife, to develop and maintain public access to the lands and waters of the state and wildlife resources thereon, to regulate wildlife populations and the public enjoyment of wildlife in a manner that is compatible with the primary uses of the land and waters of the state, to provide optimum recreational benefits, and to make decisions that affect wildlife resources of the state for the benefit of the wildlife resource, and to make decisions that allow for the best social, economic, recreational, and utilization of the wildlife resources by all user groups. As I stated last time, ORS 215416, the permit application. Number 4, it says a county may not approve an application if the proposed use of the land is found to be in conflict with the comprehensive plan of the county and other applicable use, regulations, or ordinance provisions. The approval may include such conditions as authorized by statute or county legislation. As I stated in the previous comment, in the county's comprehensive plan, the map clearly states that everything northwest of the Warner Valley Highway is
140 east. Yeah.
140 east now, they call it the Warner Valley Highway, was zoned for future farm residential. The area of mitigation is dead center in the rural residential area that the comprehensive plan has.
Referring to the same document you're talking about, Commissioner, and if I recall, looking at the Lake County Comprehensive Plan, also in the dead center of the Dubrow property is labeled rangeland. Nowhere in the document do we talk about rangeland.
I have that wrote down, but I forgot to say it.
Rangeland to me would be in support of livestock and also of wildlife.
Under the state's application standards and notices, section B says demonstrate that the construction and operation of a renewable energy facility taking into account mitigation will not result in significant adverse impacts to historic, cultural, and archaeological resources. So we talked about the archaeological resources that are there, but we didn't talk about culture. And so when people talk about cultural, I hope they understand what cultural means. The dictionary states that culture relating to the ideas, customs, and social behavior of society. Maxwell's stated that they've been here for over 150 years or close to it. Same way with Vernon's, same way with my family. And so that property has adverse effects to our culture here. There's no denying that. And so I've been preaching this since we started this deal. My problem is that it's still used for farm use, graze land, range land. When you guys were offered by the Rivers Inn Ranch in Valley Falls a place and you didn't take it, it didn't have the scenic byway, it didn't have any houses by it. It was an alkali flat, you can't even graze it. And then you pick this because it saves you money. Well, I don't think we would be in the same place if you picked land that wasn't used for farm use, or at least used farm use. 0.08% might not mean anything to you guys of grazing land. That's huge for us because you never get that back. It's not something that we get back. Going back quickly to the conservation easement, under that same deal, under C, BC, small c, says demonstrate the site for renewable energy facility taking into account mitigation can be restored adequately to useful non-hazardous condition following permanent cessation of construction or operation of the facility, and that the applicant has reasonable likelihood of obtaining financial assurance in the form and amount satisfactory to the county to secure restoration of the site to useful non-hazardous condition. I don't believe that site can ever be restored, especially if the conservation easement is in there, because every conservation easement I've ever been a part of is forever. It's not for the life of a project. And two, I see in your plan that you hired a financial institution to do your estimation of what it would cost to restore. But according to the same document under 4, it says, upon the receipt of reasonable cost estimate from a state agency, a tribe, the applicant and the county may jointly enter into a cost reimbursement agreement administered by the county. In other words, you can't use an independent. We have to use a state agency or tribe to make that judgment call.
Commissioner Albertson, just really quick, I want to go back to your comment about the conservation easement and never being able to be restored. Could you expound on that a little bit?
So every conservation easement, what most conservation
It's okay.
conservation easements are used for is to keep a tract of land as one tract, can't be subdivided, can't be split into parcels, and it can never be developed. And so, unless there's other ones, which I'm sure there might be, but every one that I've ever been involved in, they're for life. If you sell that piece of property, that conservation easement goes with it. So you could buy the piece of property, but you could never develop it.
Right.
And that goes totally against our comprehensive plan because that mitigation is dead center in the north end of our comprehension.
Right, and that was the point that I was kind of making earlier, is that I don't think conservation plans, or at least mitigation agreements and mitigation plans, should extend beyond the life of any project of any kind.
The thing
Was
is
that in
that,
essence what you were trying to say?
Yeah.
or-
I mean, I don't want a conservation easement on there at all, because the reason it is because we have a plan. And part of our economic development plan for the county is the biggest obstacle that we're running into is housing. And
Agreed.
we have hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of jobs available in Lake County, but people won't move here because there's no place to live. And so if we take out more of our chances of a housing development or building little miniature ranchettes out on the north end, we're just cutting our own throat on economic development.
But again, we also have it built within our plan that we prioritize that, what is within the urban growth boundary.
Right.
And that is not within the urban growth boundary.
But it is in our future use.
Right.
And with the town of Lakeview's water problems, people should move out of town so they can have good drinking water. Sorry. Do you guys wanna talk for a minute? While I catch my breath?
Sure, different subject, if that's okay. We may come back to Commissioner Overton's subjects. I read the glare analysis. That was a big topic with a lot of the public that commented. And, it's not a real in-depth, deep plan. It's, 7 pages, 6.5 pages. But amazingly, on every spot that was observed near homes, near roadways, routes, it all came up to 0 glint glare. And so here I live 7 miles out of town, west of Lakeview, and I get a very nice glint glare from the airport solar panels. Now I'm, mile plus, maybe not mile and a half anyway. So I guess I'm out of that, glint glare discussion for the airport solar. I just would have a really hard time if we approved this plan to truly believe, like for example, where the Grams sit up on top of a hill, that they're going to have 0 glint glare. If we were to approve this plan, I would be pushing for a follow-up glint glare analysis that would need to be, I would want to have done, because we're talking for the next 35 years. And I have a really hard time believing everything was 0. 100%. Routes 1 through 5, residences, 23 of them. 2 runways, which I didn't and the rest were 5 runways. So I can see where the runways probably aren't in the picture there, but the 23 residences and the surrounding area and all the routes,
There is an airport within.
the project site does not sit in a hole, and it doesn't sit on top of a mountain either. There certainly is a flat ground in that area, and the glint glare analysis, I guess I would really, if the plan were approved and implemented, I would want another analysis completed.
That's a very good point. This was why I brought the Clinton Glare project study up in the last meeting, was because it says in there, I think it's on the summary, it says there are no predicted glare occurrences, and it uses that phrase several times in the study. for nearby residences or roadways. But it's only in the application of FAA aviation standards. Now your subject matter are solar panels, residents, and roadways. None of them are aviation. Now maybe we could make an argument that the FAA is the only entity out there that has glint and glare standards to apply. But they even say in here that this determination that there are no impacts, no predicted glare impacts, is in the absence of non-aviation regulatory guidelines. And maybe there just are none to really apply to residents and everything else, which is a good point. Like you look out across towards Airport Solar from where you live, and you get glint and glare all the time. But this isn't this determination is made in the application of FAA aviation standards. So this to me, the glint and glare, even if it isn't necessarily part of the criteria for us to make a determination, I feel like the very fact that it's even in the application, to us, to me, it just doesn't hold any water.
Says, this GHAT results do not predict glare occurrences at any of the 23 observation points, which are the residences, at either viewing height as a result of single axis tracking rays.
I think it was on the prior page, on the third paragraph down on page 1, where it basically just says the phrase that I was just commenting on.
I pretty much ruled out the runway strips because if we currently have solar panels right next to our main Lake County Airport, obviously this one isn't going to fit.
Right.
I would especially expect this one not to have glare or glint problem for the 2 airports in consideration, but the 23 residences and the 5 routes around there, I have some doubt.
Well, it just lends itself to the idea of, okay, you applied aviation standards to make this determination and you determined there were no impacts. Well, then you go back and say, but you didn't apply non-aviation standards. Why? Is it because there are no non-aviation standards or because they weren't applied? Or is it because they would yield a different outcome and show that there actually is glare? It's puzzling to me. So, no, good point.
Question for you, Jordan. For Logan, sorry. Logan. You guys, last meeting were able to move the southwest corner of the project area. I mentioned that was half of what I was looking for. Was there any more discussion with your group about any additional ability to move the project?
There was further discussion, but there is not any additional ability to move the rest of those panels.
Which goal is the fire plan? We're finding. Right in here somewhere.
Under ours or theirs?
There's. Let's see what's out the front, I think. Okay. So A5, fire protection. In the previous public meetings, so before I became a commissioner, I also had 32 years of fighting fire. So I got a little bit of background. The project states that there will be, read it here. The solar array site includes fire perimeter roads with hammerhead turnouts to provide adequate fire and emergency vehicle access to the site. which also acts as a fire break to provide defensible firefighting space. If I recall, we didn't have a plan for the northeast corner of the project. Did not have a full perimeter road around it. Is that still correct?
I did look into that. Additionally, following the guidelines that we were given by the fire chiefs, we did not believe that a fire road was needed there because there are not any adjacent structures like there are on the other properties. And
So you're looking at values at risk then? Values at risk
sure, yeah.
on that side.
Yeah, and so we were following the guidance that we received. We certainly plan on continuing as we finalize our design, continuing to work with the fire chiefs and making sure we're meeting all the requests that they have.
So in my experience, if you don't have a road or fire perimeter around the whole project, it does open up for some vulnerability. I think we could all agree to that in that northeast corner. You would either have fire where you are receiving it, potentially, let's say a vehicle fire from the Thomas Creek Road by the dump, catches fire and burns towards the solar, or we have a bird that bites the panels that causes a spark, and you are now responsible for fire that's going away from the solar site. It does open yourself up for that vulnerability. It's a point of weakness in the plan with the fire plan. And access and egress for firefighting equipment. If you're getting volunteer fire departments, these are not light engines that are driving, they're heavy. It can be difficult to get access and egress in a timely manner to fight those type of fires, especially in that rolly type of area that's out there. Something that you might consider. Or that I have considered, I guess.
Would you like to formulate that as a condition, or are you looking to just point that out as a problem or clarification?
If the board determines that we want to go that direction, that would be a condition that I would like to see in place, yes.
Right.
To touch on your fire, I have a letter from two of the fire chiefs. Daniel Tagg, fire chief for Thomas Creek West Side, Rural Fire Protection District Road. Commissioner Albertson, as we discussed, there's an email discussing solar farm fires in the Gate Goose Lake Valley throughout 2021. There were 3 solar fires to my knowledge. I have requested dispatch to pull the CADs and send them to you. I know one was at the airport, and then as I recall, there were 2 on the stock drive. I believe the 2 were both in the month of August when resources were scarce because of the Patton Meadow fire. As for training, we have not received any specialized training, nor do we expect to have any available for fighting solar farm fires. I'd rather catch it at an established road and not risk injury to any firefighters. There is no property worth getting someone hurt, and we all know that water and smoke don't mix well with electricity.
Commissioner, are these in the record or is this new evidence?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. When did those letters come in?
11-1.
So this,
Do you don't want me to use that evidence?
well, it's a matter of new record. Was that shared with Darwin? Darwin, did you receive those?
The record was closed prior to that, so
Yeah, I'm not.
I think the applicant will probably have something.
I know that there were letters that we did receive from the fire departments, wasn't there? Or from a fire chief, wasn't there? I have the letters right here that I went over.
And the letters don't oppose or,
It's new information, so it's part of the, it would have to either be part of the record or we couldn't use it as part of the record or part of our determination. So unless it went through Darwin while the record was open. And Jim Bailey, you can add on to this if you have more.
Yes, I don't remember exactly, the date that the record was closed. We had it open after the past meeting, for, I think, a week and a half. So anything that came in after that, Darwin can confirm what the date was, but anything after that, you can't accept it.
So what was the date that the record actually closed because we allowed it to be open?
Yeah, it was on the 20th, as at the close of the hearing.
But it was
And
open.
for opposition, and then for the applicant to submit by the 29th.
Right, so the
Which is-
applicant only had for the final rebuttal up until the 29th. So anything after that, unless I reopen the record.
I'll strike it.
Darwin, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there letters or communication, emails from the fire department at one point, I know, that stated something at least similar to that?
I don't recall, anything from any of our fire chiefs directly.
Sure you don't.
Looking back through record. Let's see.
When you're looking for that.
Yeah, sure, go right ahead, I'm gonna do a quick search through my
ORS
record.
215-296, standards for approval of certain uses.
What was the again?
ORS 215-296, standards for approval of certain uses in exclusive farm use zones. Number one, it says uses allowed under ORS 215-213, uses permitted in exclusive farm use zones in counties that adopted marginal land system prior to 1993, or 215-283, uses permitted in exclusive farm use zones in non-marginal land counties. And that's what you folks considered us. On one A, let me finish it. It says, these may be improved only where the local governing body or its designee finds that the use will not force a significant change in accepted farm or forest practices on surrounding lands devoted to farm use. B, significantly increase the cost or accepted farm or forest practices on surrounding lands devoted to farm or forest use. We've also already noted that it will be a significant cost to Mr. Vernon for sure, who has to find pasture for 100 head of cattle. And it truly does force a significant change in accepted farm or forest practices on surrounding farmlands devoted to farm or forest.
maps are lots of them.
So in section 4 of your guys' compliance with Lake County land use regulations, section 4.1, it talks about, you guys are stating that the following uses and their accessory uses are permitted outright. Utility facilities necessary for public service except commercial facilities for the purpose of generating power for the use by the sale of transmission towers over 200 feet in height. Your response was you're in this section, you're calling yourself, it says, in accordance with Oregon law, the county's A1 zone allows utility facilities necessary for public service as a permitted use. But everywhere else besides in here, and in your application, you state under Article 2A-1 exclusive farm use, number 5, that you are a commercial utility facilities for the purpose of generating power for public use by sale, which is not a permitted use. I kind of feel like you guys were trying to slip one past us on that myself, but
Commissioner Tim McMahon here. Would you like us to respond to that?
sure.
There are two different characterizations of these uses. Utility facility for public service is not the same as a generation use as defined by Oregon law. What that section you're pointing to is utility facility for public services is applicable to things like transmission lines and pipelines. It is not applicable and is not the same thing as a generation use, which is allowed as a conditional use. So utility facilities for public service transmission lines, which we're talking about here, pipelines and the like, are actually an allowed use subject to conditions. It is not the same as a generation facility.
Correct.
Provides that.
I understand that, but why did you not include that in your findings? Why didn't you include the findings of the actual site? Because as previously stated, the transmission lines weren't part of the site plan.
Well, Paul, if you could jump in here. I mean, the transmission lines are part of the overall facility. We applied a different statute to it because that's what we needed to do under the law. It's ORS 215-274 and ORS 215-275, which is reflected in the county's code.
Yeah, there are four main components to this project. There's the solar array. There are the collector lines that bring power from the solar array to the proposed substation. That's the third component. And then there will be a short run of transmission line between the proposed substation and the existing Pacific Core substation. That run of transmission line between those two substations is the only project component that we have categorized under the utility facility necessary for public service. The other three components, the solar array, the collector line, and the proposed substation, by law, are categorized under commercial utility facility for the purpose of generating power for public use by sale. So that's how the four uses are categorized by state law. That's how they were analyzed in the application.
Bounce around, guys, and just in our discussion, commissioners, with each other. I'm looking at Appendix A, Figure 10, and speaking about wildlife. And in that map, it identifies Lake County, Goal 5, Big Game Winter Range. Shows it all across Highway 385 to the northeast of the project. I wish I would have asked ODF&W how recent this analysis is. I didn't get, because everything we're hearing, a lot of the wildlife are spending year-round time in this area, especially in the Dubrow site, but also across the road from the Dubrow and the surrounding pivots and whatnot in the area. So you see that upper checkered piece up there.
Who I think you could ask maybe as a clarification, John Muir, if you'd like to give any clarification on how recent that this actually is.
Yeah, happy to, you guys. The Goal 5 county adopted map was adopted in 1995. That's was a compromise at that time between the county and the state to try and identify those really core areas of winter range that were critical for protection. It's important to note the distinction there between the Goal 5 adopted winter range and biological winter range, which is very different, and it is a much larger area. So those Goal 5 adopted locations aren't the full extent of winter range. Those are just those areas that were agreed to receive additional protection.
Core areas.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for clarification.
Good point.
I guess my follow-up question would be, is 1995 information relevant at this point?
If I may, it's still, those areas still remain as core and central to the health of wildlife populations today. How those have changed, they certainly have changed through time as a result of changing winter conditions and overall land use changes in the area. But those areas identified in 1995 as core winter range use are still core.
As ODF, if this is okay, Darwin, are we okay to?
Yeah,
We're just trying to get
clarification on the points that we have on right
Yeah,
now.
I don't want your opinion, but has ODF&W discussed it or discussed updating their maps?
Oh, yes, sir.
And either funding or personnel or other things have been factors in that not being updated.
Yeah, there's a variety of factors that have precluded that, and not the least of which is the authority lies ultimately with the county. So we can reevaluate based on new data, but how that translates into county zoning ordinance is up to the county.
Thank you.
So going back real quick to the conversation around fire and discussions with fire staff. I couldn't find any letters from the fire chiefs in the record, but I do know that there was conversations with Eric Desmarius and some of the fire chiefs prior to, I think it was an early part of this year, perhaps, sometime last winter maybe, where there was discussions around, you know, what aid could be provided and what couldn't be. I'm not seeing that in the record here.
It's just verbal.
It was a verbal, meeting at the Lakeview, Fire Hall. With, I believe Dennis Morrow was there, and I believe, Mark, is this fire chief out on my side? Suba, thank you. I don't know if that falls under disclosure to make sure that the board is aware that those conversations have taken place, because I couldn't find it in the record, where there were any actual letters provided.
So, Mr. Chairman, we've been sitting here an hour and a half. I'm ready for a quick break.
Absolutely. We'll take, would you like 5-10 minutes, you think?
How about 10?
10 minutes. We'll reconvene and at, 11:40. The time is 11:41. We're gonna reconvene the meeting, and continue discussion among the board. Anything else where we wanna go, any thoughts?
Well, I just wanna do a process check. Kinda see where we're at. I realize we're bringing up points and whatnot. Where does the process go forward?
Well, honestly, at this point, I might defer to legal counsel a little bit here. And Darwin, if you have some points to jump in, but I would say, we've had several points where, some additional information may have started to factor into it. And I just wanna make sure that we're not using those. That's a big part of the process that I think we need to be very cognizant of. And making sure that we're checking ourselves on the expiry date contact as well. So, that's one of the only things that I've kind of highlighted in my notes at this point. As far as the process is concerned anyway. Did you have anything that you were thinking about particularly?
I appreciate all the, we've been talking about. If the project were to be approved, where does the contingency discussion fit into that? That discussion, I don't understand
Okay, so
how that would work.
well, we could do this several ways. We could start going through the individual criteria and start making a determination on whether or not the board feels that it actually does meet that criteria.
I don't know that we're done with discussion.
Correct. I don't think we are either. But that process could also generate additional conversation as well. So, and we just allowing ourselves to have some discussion about what our thoughts are on the actual criteria.
And then, is there a possibility that we would not come up with a decision today?
There is a very, very good possibility, just judging by my notes, and I have a lot of them. I think there is a potential for continuation as well. Darwin, do you have anything that you'd like to add on this?
There's definitely some points, for a lot of the things that have been brought up as concerns with, ORS, OER language, how it relates to this application, and, especially Commissioner Robertson brought up that I, need some clarification either, by myself or legal counsel, to see if that, is actually, criteria that applies, or if it's understood correctly.
If it's applicable, you mean, or
Yeah,
to?
exactly, yeah. And
Well,
I only used the numbers that they used in their review, so.
yeah,
Right, and I think it's tough as commissioners, when we have ORSs and OARs and everything else, we are trying to apply the law. We become quasi judicial in this manner. And we want to make sure that we are being conscientious of all aspects of the law. And so when we see conflicts, I think it's really important though, before we make determinations based upon those, that we get good confirmation from legal counsel and good understanding of those. And remember, like this board in particular, we've only done, this isn't something that we do very often in a quasi-judicial manner. It seems like it's become more commonplace. But, for Commissioner Schulenberger, this is one of our first times going through this process.
And I think, this is your guys' decision, I have nothing to do with the decision, and so I only would wanna give you, if you want clarification as to the statute and the rule on how it applies or doesn't apply. Going over the findings document, if there's a statute that you referenced that wasn't part of the findings document that's been proposed.
Which one was that?
And that's why I wanna go back and look at each of these, but
Okay.
if there was something brought up that wasn't addressed by the applicant as potential criteria that maybe wasn't brought up before, then there would be no finding proposed from myself or the applicant in this case. It would need to be addressed or in a concern raised that they haven't rebutted because it's being brought up today and hadn't been brought up previously is all I'm saying, is that
Right.
If we've got new concerns, the applicant should have had time to address those concerns, and that's why if we bring in criteria that wasn't looked at before as potential approval criteria, then that's something that maybe the record is gonna be clear and I can touch on if it's applicable or not, or legal counsel could, but if it's something that the applicant is new to them as being potential criteria, then they would need to, have an opportunity to respond to that, is all I'm saying. The application that they presented went over, what they believed, what I, plans or ordinances believed was the criteria, and so I'm just saying, I didn't know exactly which points I followed exactly the criteria that has been presented as the findings that address the criteria. So if there's a couple extra, I just want to make sure that we're clear on if it's applicable or not.
So, quick question then on that. I'm gonna dive in here a little bit. Going back to the question around rangeland and designations of range. In the applicant's final rebuttal, they do state no portion of the project site is designated as range under the land use plan, and the classification, description, goals, and policies for range are not applicable to the application. Is that a factual statement?
I'm concerned that we may have looked at the wrong designation. I want to look back at the figures to see if that's accurate. I mean, I believe that the applicant believed that that's not range from the maps that we have in our old comprehensive plan, which is the binder that we have. It may be different than what I have as our zoning and comprehensive plan layers. So I have that same concern because I know it's been brought up multiple times if this is range or if this is all comprehensive.
It was stated during discussion that range wasn't covered or addressed. And the only time that I see it at least addressed, and I'm just referring to the one document as far as the final rebuttal, it is addressed, mentioned twice in the same sentence, being that no portion of the project site is designated as range.
Our map clearly states it's in range.
And I only bring that up because there have been some amendments to those maps from what is in the book. That should be a living document, should be most accurate. But I'm just wondering if that's where maybe there was a little bit of confusion if it's range or if it's ag as a comprehensive plan. They've addressed it as ag, which is in most cases more restrictive than range.
Right. You mean A2?
No, so the zone is different than
Or
what we
A1.
talk about. So zoning is A1 or A2, the comp plan is either ag or range. So they're different, they work together, they don't always match up, so that's. The zone is definitely A2, the comp plan is the question on if it was ag, considered ag as part of the designated map area or range. The transmission, absolutely 100% would cover stuff that's comprehensive plan as ag. As well as public. Roberta.
So
We can come back to that.
well, just a little bit extra on it just before I jump off the subject, because going over to the staff report and the recommendations from the planning commission, stated at the bottom of page 4 of 13, it states the subject property for the proposed solar facility is zoned A2 agricultural use with a comprehensive plan designation of R range on July 8th, 1982. The proposed subsection is on A1, exclusive farm use, with a designation of A for agricultural. So the proposed substation is on A1, but, and this is per the findings of the planning commission itself that does find that the proposed solar facility is on designated range land via our comprehensive plan. However, if you go over to the final rebuttal, the applicant states that no portion of the project site is on designated range. So I'm confused.
The map clearly
Yeah, right,
states
so-
virtually everything from the town of Lakeview to the golf course north is, north of the golf course is rangeland. Everything north of Lakeview past the Warner Canyon Road is rangeland, including the wildlife mitigation.
Yeah, and again, like this is something that, you know, I'm only now just getting the chance to really bring forward because, I mean, we haven't been able to have a meeting or discuss this since our prior meeting. And we didn't even have the applicant's final rebuttal until the 29th, or towards the end of December at least. Actually, I think, when did we actually receive that?
The last rebuttal.
Yeah, actually, I think it came in before the deadline of the 29th. So, in looking at that and finding the discrepancy between what the applicant is looking for us to adopt as a final finding and what our planning commission adopted as a finding as to the actual zoning of the project site. That's just the point that I'm calling into issue.
The final rebuttal came in on Thursday, the 28th of October.
Yes, that's right. I knew it was like at least several days prior. I just couldn't remember like a day prior.
Commissioner, let me just point out that
Yes, sir.
we have, this raises actually two questions. One, is there an error? It sounds like there was in the plan commission's finding. But then the second question is whether or not it makes any difference. Darwin just said that the ag restrictions are more onerous than rangeland. So it's possible, even if there's a mistake and it should have been described as ag, that it wouldn't make any difference when you determine whether or not they met the application criteria. However, this may be an issue that you have to refer to both Darwin and myself to determine both of those questions and report back to you before you can make a decision.
Right, and I think definitely the latter question. for
Yeah.
sure.
Thank you, Jim, for those comments, and, certainly all the process has been handled correctly, the planning commission, recommendation would still, be adequate. I think that the question now is that statement in the findings document would not be correct, and so
In the,
if there's
you mean in the rebuttal or the findings of the
Both.
planning commission?
really, no, not the findings of the planning commission, just in the final.
In the final rebuttal?
Yeah, and so, if there's an error here, which I believe that there is, the applicant feels that it was not range. Again, in agricultural lands are the ones to clarify my statement before, ag is what we're trying to protect the most, A1
Correct.
and ag, and then A2 ends up in the more for the grazing areas, and that's not disputed. I mean, that's what the plan states. So, if it hasn't been addressed, it should have been addressed, and that's the error that wasn't caught before,
Mhm.
on how the language reads, on that it's not range. I honestly, looking back at this whole process, I remember the applicant saying that there was no range, and I thought they'd misspoken and I didn't clarify it, and I wish I had a meeting ago.
Okay.
Because I remember that the staff report did say range, and so I didn't look back in the record to try to match up that comment in the record. And now that I'm reading over this again, I thought that was an error, and again, wasn't sure why that was being addressed that way.
Yeah, so, cool. I think if we were to adopt findings, my preference would be to adopt the findings of the planning commission. And not necessarily that of the applicant, regardless of whether or not it makes that much difference upon an approval. I think it needs to be made clear that the findings of the planning commission are that the solar facility is on designated range. For any continuation of this meeting and discussion I think it just needs to be pointed out that that is actually the case. Final rebuttal says that it isn't, but the determination of the actual zoning, it is on range. And of course, as Jim Bailey pointed out, the second part of that question can be followed up on. And we can even have further discussion if the board so chooses today on whether or not that's a difference, but I just. So would we like to have any additional conversation on that? I'm not trying to put Mr. Bailey or you, Darwin, on the spot. As you've already pointed out, agricultural or A1 exclusive farm use is actually more restrictive than range.
Is it?
No, yeah, definitely, yeah. I mean, we got 80 acre minimums versus 160 acre minimums. There's an extra hold criteria for even farm dwellings on less than 80 acres in a 2 zone. There's other spots I can point that it's more restrictive. Primarily all your
How about the use
high
of-
value ag lands are in the agricultural designation.
Yeah.
Almost none of your pivots are in range designation. And that's evidence not just in this valley, but in the other areas of the
Right,
county
because
as well.
A1 is typically always more,
Yeah, it's exclusive farm use, so it's what
Exclusive.
A1 stands for. They're both protected, but certainly A1 is more in the agricultural designation more. Yeah, and back to what Mr. Bailey pointed out, that doesn't change really anything. Certainly a finding would need to adequately reflect the right comp plan designation. And then where in the record or where in the decision, it references the incorrect comprehensive plan, a finding should be updated to show that it's in range. And again, I don't, for all the things that have been brought up, this is to me not the biggest issue. It's the other things are of way greater concern, and that's why I say this is actually they've applied a standard that's even higher than what I think the range.
Right, it's,
worked
I
out.
think it's just an error that I wanted to make sure that was pointed
Oh, it's
out because
extremely
it's
important.
come up several times.
Yeah, and I wish I made that connection with this misunderstanding earlier.
And our county, comprehensive plan on page 11. Number 2, range. This classification designates areas suitable for and desirable to be maintained for grazing and other activities related to livestock operations and associated employment and food production, all of which are important factors in the economic well-being of the region. Range areas are comprised primarily of public and private improved or unimproved rangelands and may include forested acreages and other cultivated farmlands, ranch improvements, water development sites, wildlife, and various other types of recreation, for instance, hunting and hiking. And aggregate and mineral extractions are often associated with range operations. It is intended that the range designated areas will have the same degree of protection from encroaching and compatible uses as agriculture designated areas. Then over on A, under the same, it says a number of range designated locations have been identified for possible farm residential subdivision development. In most cases, they are peripheral lower foothill locations with good access and juniper growth. It goes on to explain that, and it talks about the intersection of 140, 395 as that.
So, and on that same section, on that first paragraph, on page 12, it was saying that plan changes would be required to convert these possible future areas to outright use for subdivision development. So same goal exception process that we're going through now, we have to apply to that. Same if the big game wind range area would get changed to include maybe some of this area. So the current ordinance on big game wind range is 160 acre minimum.
Really, I mean, wouldn't the same goal exception have to take place for all the residents that are there right now?
No, that's,
Under
those
the
are allowed
conditional
to
use
be
permit.
processed through the type 2 conditional use
Okay,
permit
under the
process,
type 2.
which is similar to the type 2 that we're going through.
So how come they're different than if somebody else wanted to build a house on the other side? On the highway?
I'm not sure why.
Why would the planning be any different than the houses that are already there?
To change it to the future use that you were referencing on the map before, as that's what we were, designating that as, to change it to a subdivision development.
Yeah, as
which
residential, you mean?
For farm residential would require a goal exception. The existing tax lots themselves can go through a type 2 conditional use permit.
Conditional use permit for
And it doesn't change the
non-farm
zone, but this would be, wouldn't necessarily require a zone change, but it certainly would require a comprehensive plan change to allow that future development area to be done.
So
And we haven't
going
done one of
on
those
your comprehensive plan,
15 years, 20 years.
under 6, air, water, and land resource quality. Under B, plan policies, number 3, states that planning decisions will recognize immediate and long-range effects on quality of natural resources and those uses which may likely have an adverse effect on resource quality and and those uses which may likely have an adverse effect on resource quality may be prohibited. Number 4, that fish and wildlife habitats will be protected to the extent practical. Number 7, development in the floodplains will meet federal insurance administration requirements. And number 12, land use decisions should take into account the need to promote and enhance the improvement of watershed conditions and facilities for all beneficial uses, particularly the need for enhanced fish and wildlife habitat and recreational opportunities, with emphasis on riparian areas.
Commissioner, I was reading some of my own documentations there when you were reading verbatim from the plan about rangeland. Was there anything in there I missed about it being more restrictive or less restrictive?
It has the same protection as ag land.
The acreage minimum is probably the biggest difference. There are slight differences, but they are both protected, is what that was talking about.
Okay.
And again, if they've addressed it as ag land and it's actually range, the same protection, they've addressed the same protections. The goal exception would still be required, it's still something they've addressed as part of the criteria. And then it just depends on if you guys feel that it's justified or not, according to the criteria. To allow, obviously, the exception. Which section was that last part?
Which one, what did I say?
Which goal? Yeah, I realize it was from the comp plan, but which goal did we specifically from?
The plan policies,
Yeah, and which Roman numeral?
it's 6
6.
under B,
Yeah,
and I stated 3, 4, 7, and 12.
So are we referencing the actual ORS, or OAR that requires the goal 3 exception? Exception? Are we referencing that?
are we referencing?
Well, I
We
guess,
reference it all the time.
well, we're talking,
That was
right.
our comprehensive plan.
okay, out of the comprehensive plan, but then again, I was just going over to the Oregon revised statute, the goal exception criteria goals review. Planning Commission lays out a number of the ORSs that actually
Have to be
detail
addressed.
those goal 3 exceptions and the exceptions themselves.
And I think what Commissioner Albertson is just addressing is that, for findings purposes, the comprehensive plan still applies. And so
Correct.
have these plan policies under B, 3, 4, 7, and 12, and any others that he has quoted, have they been, fully addressed, and does this proposal meet those planning goals? Because if it doesn't,
Mhm.
an earlier ORS that he quoted under 215, 296 standards, in which these you can't approve a project from looking through it's just my notes, but if I'm looking through it, one, any proposal has to meet your comprehensive plan unless you were to ask for a comprehensive plan change as well. If you couldn't meet, say, a goal or a policy within that goal.
At 215, what?
I think it was 296 is what he, under standards.
Under which one?
Well, I thought that was ORS 215 446
That sounds.
for renewable energy facility application standards.
That I'm referring to from what we was talking about before.
Okay,
I'll look.
well, you said it was application standards, so I'm, the
Not
one
the
that
application standards, just that the county can't approve a project if it doesn't meet if it conflicts with county. Actually, what I have is 215.416.
416, okay.
Number 4 is what my note says, and I don't have the statute pulled up in front of me, so. But so again, the question is, have those policies been addressed by the applicant as we feel they apply to this project? And certainly they've addressed air, water and land qualities, and then you just have to find if those things have been addressed or not. And then it needs to be substantial on the record on how we feel like these things would be met if we're saying they're not being met.
Yeah, no, this is, and so you were referencing that particular ORS 416 subsection 4, correct?
On which, so,
That was on the one where a county may not approve an application if the proposed land use is found to be in conflict with the comprehensive plan of the county.
can't say exactly.
I'm sorry, I'm just,
ORS 215416.
okay,
I'll continue unless you guys want.
did you have anything?
I don't have anything more.
Go ahead.
So, under, intergovernmental coordination, actually it's under, resource utilization in the county's comprehensive plan, page 51, number 9. The county supports utilization of renewable energy resources. However, such support is conditioned on determination that the proposed use can be developed in a timely, orderly, and environmentally sound manner, and that adequate protection of the resources provided so as to ensure its continued availability and productivity over time. Going down to economic development, number 11 on the same page, the county support for renewable energy development shall be closely coordinated with the economic development program. The county believes that this resource may offer a significant comparative advantage to a business and industry and shall support renewable energy projects that serve to retain or create employment opportunities in the county. I wanted to bring up the economic deal because of the housing situation we're having. Page 52, under environmental protection, number 13. In all cases, the county's support for renewable energy development shall be conditioned upon satisfactory evidence that sufficient environmental safeguards are provided. Environmental concerns of the county shall include, but not limited to, air quality, water quality, noise, water consumption, fish and wildlife, vegetation, historic and cultural resources, visual and scenic quality, and public safety and health. Page 53, under plan policies, B, number 9. That uses with undesirable noise, smoke, odor, visual, and other objectionable characteristics may be prohibited from locating in areas where such conditions are incompatible with the surrounding area development.
And that's an urbanization goal, it doesn't apply to that location.
Number 11, under plan policies, says that minimum acreage in the area designated rural residential in the Warner Junction vicinity will be 3 acres.
So how would that apply?
Warner Valley, Warner Junction.
Yeah.
So that's where the extra land for the mitigation is coming from.
Right, but you said minimum acreage had to be 3 acres
Because
for each set.
we have a rural residential zone right at across the road from the Warner Junction, which is now going to be under mitigation.
Right, but none of those
They're two
parcels.
different areas.
There's-
So,
Okay, so
So
that
just
was
let me
where I was
clarify.
going there too.
so this, reading 11 again, it says that the minimum acreage in the area designated rural residential. So that's an area that's been designated rural residential, and that area is at Old Smoky just to the north. It's primarily owned by Howard's, but it's along the highway there, and it's on the map as what's been designated, already taken a rural exception on, which is further in the appendix as something that's already been approved for goal exception to rezone it, redesignate it as rural residential.
Right, so that section in question
So
isn't
it's
part
not
of
the
the
same as
mitigation
yeah,
section.
it's not the same section as what's
I'm
FR.
right at this moment, I'm disagreeing until I.
Okay, that's fine, I just, that one section with the smaller lots and everything else, I just don't recall, I don't believe that it's actually part of that same mitigation area.
So when we're talking about what's been designated and it's the area. Which is right.
Sorry, I had the map out and I lost it.
So on page 17, this map, which is the land use plan, Goose Lake Valley. It's got, again, just north of Old Smoky, the rural residential.
This is the rural residential. Here's Ski Hill Road, 140. It goes all the way up north past the ski hill, straight west into the south.
Okay.
A narrow strip that, it's on our maps, yeah. But it doesn't include the Duru site.
But see, the Duber, it just
includes
goes up.
the mitigation, the wildlife mitigation plan.
No, because the mitigation plan only goes, it goes past theirs too. It actually doesn't touch the highway until just north of there. So I think the section that you're.
Okay, so
this-
they're acquiring more acreage to meet the 2
Right,
one.
which they wouldn't be able to acquire
and
the
that's
acreage.
this property.
See, they wouldn't be able to utilize this property or anything that was in that rural residential area as part of their
So-
mitigation.
This is the rural residential, there's Warner Highway. This is the property that they're trying to acquire. I'm not gonna bring up who they're trying to acquire it from.
Mhm.
So. In the mitigation plan, the upcoming one that we haven't received, where they're buying more property, is dead center in the rural residential.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, But, you know, whatever mitigation that we were to approve, say that if we were to approve mitigation, say we wanted 2-to-1. If that's what we wanted, they're up, and because the mitigation plan that we have in front of us is basically a draft, and it may be changing. We couldn't accept a rural residential area as part of that mitigation plan. Correct. Right?
Well, what I'm saying
Even if they
is
were
that
trying to use that
if this
for property.
becomes in the mitigation, that rural residential area that's already been zoned is out.
Right, but again, like it's so just pointing out right here, this is the Dubru site border right there. This is the only section that's actually rural residential, this part right here.
No, this part is rural residential. This,
Right, but this section right here, as you've already circled, is range, correct, Darwin?
right.
So
But
this
they
is all,
cut this
that's all
out of the
range.
range. See what I'm saying?
Right,
But they're buying this property, which includes this.
right, but they couldn't use any of that for their mitigation, correct?
Well, I'd like to look at this on the current tax lot layer to see if that's really what we're talking about as any part of the Dubru site. Now, what you're
It's not
referencing
part of
is
the Duvert site. It's part of the wildlife mitigation plan,
that they,
acreage.
that you're talking about that they haven't approved yet.
And we
don't
haven't
have the-
seen yet.
We
The
haven't
final
seen.
copy of it, yeah, so if,
We don't even know if it's a conservation easement. We don't know what kind of easement.
but what I'm saying is that plan hasn't been finalized, and what you're also saying too is that we wouldn't accept a plan that includes that portion that's designated as RR.
Well,
And it's not finalized.
Right,
Yeah.
or one that was a permanent wildlife easement,
Yeah.
because
I'd
I'm
like
not
to-
So-
interested.
We're not gonna accept RR. Are we gonna accept, farm residential? Because that's what everything north is.
You mean range or A1 or A2?
No, farm residential. So, on that same map, this is all range.
Correct.
Farm residential, this area is farm residential. Everything along the highway, which is now under
Which
their
is-
proposed mitigation.
Go ahead, Darwin.
Well, yep. I agree that the portions of that area, are part of their, from this map that's on page 17 and what's, the junction, and you can clearly see where the junction is
It's, and
on
it,
this.
and it
It
states that,
extends beyond that junction north in a sliver, just describing this map. Wish I could put it up on the screen. And again,
how many,
going from these
does it tell
maps
you
to
how
other
many
maps
acres that is?
and not, it doesn't on this. It could if I were to try to redraw it on the screen, but what I'm also saying is that is not what we have on our zoning layer, and the zoning layer that I have was created from using the best resource I had available to me when I started in 2011. We didn't follow this. I know that when we drew that layer, that's what the applicant also used. And what I'm saying is that the living document that should be a living document, the maps have not always followed. They've been incorrect in many different instances. And I've had to go and find past land use decisions that, prior to me joining the county where they didn't show up on this comprehensive plan map because this map wasn't a living document. I didn't even have it in Word when I got here. So, and I have no actual GIS layer of this stuff. So we've had to recreate this onto the map. And I'm not saying that there are necessarily errors to what I use to create the zoning maps and comprehensive plan maps that we use that are on the binders in my office, the 14 different binders that are on the shelf in there. But this does not match up with what I'm using currently. And again, what I felt I was using was accurate according to updates that were someone actually went through a process on.
So where does that updated map state the farm residential and the rural residential are?
Well, the farm residential is just a proposed plan, so it's not even on there anywhere. And I would, this this triangle, from what was described in wording, was probably that whole area, and it's only, if we did a boundary just around that triangle, that's out in the middle of this new site, not
Yeah, but
not
that
against the
wasn't,
road, not against
that wasn't the
anything else.
intention. The intention is that area.
Right, so it's misleading is what I'm saying, so it's.
No, because
if you don't
in the
look to
plan, it
context.
states
Yeah.
the Warner
I know, but that's,
Junction
I
area.
agree with you. Let me just explain that it's misleading if you just look at the map as that triangle, but then you go to the context of the plan and you realize that they're actually describing that whole area. But they also said it would take a goal exception to actually convert that to rural residential, which
Because-
is a 10 acre.
Because only one part of it is actually rural residential, the other part is proposed farm
Future,
residential.
yeah, future farm residential, which is a 10 acre minimum. This area that's on the map, on this map on page 17, is a 3 acre minimum. But again, that's, and again, this has been the frustration that we've had to deal with, trying to figure out what the correct zoning and layers are. To move this forward and not to try to go rehash what's in the past, but on this situation, we just couldn't accept a plan that includes that 3 acre, that 3 acre minimum area that is designated as rural residential. I agree 100% with that. So how many acres is that? How much does that mean they would now have to acquire at a different location? That's something that, John Muir, ODF&W, and the applicant would have to go over. It'd be nice to have that obviously known and finalized prior to this, but I tell you, the maps that they've used are not reflected on this page because they're not what was in my office that they went to use as, what I use as the most accurate information, because I know that there have been plan changes along the way.
So let me just try and see if I can clear it up a little bit, maybe I'll make it worse, who knows? But there's, I'm glad you get a chuckle out of that. So, the future farm use is only future farm.
Future
Farm residential. So that is,
Yeah, if this is our
That's
grand vision,
proposed.
that's a future area that would have to have a goal exception.
right, because
It wasn't
right next
completed
to
at the
where they
adoption.
have the little triangle on the map and everything, where they put that into the comprehensive plan, there is an R for current zoning range. That is what is
Comprehensive
currently
plan.
at.
For
And in
comprehensive plan.
In order to get to that future farm residential, it would require a zone change, correct?
And a comprehensive plan change. To
Correct.
change it to-
Because the current comprehensive plan says range.
Because our currently our A2 zone, which this is zoned, allows for farm residential and the 10 acre minimums.
Right, so the only thing that we can make a determination on right now is basing it off of what it currently
Right.
is zoned at,
So
based on range.
based on range, which,
Now, the rural residential, that is, according to the comprehensive plan, that is what it is on the map. That's not future rural residential,
And it
that is rural
states in the
residential.
comprehensive plan, that acreage plus the rural residential. It brings it up and talks about
But that acreage in the comprehensive plan is range. Yes.
That's true.
I'm just asking questions for clarification. I'm just trying to make sure that it's straight in my head because there's about 6 different terms that we're using, and I just want to make sure that what we're basing decisions on as we deliberate is based off of what the current zoning actually is at this time.
it's absolutely A2 agriculture. And the comp plan is our range. Part of the mitigation area is definitely, that has been proposed, not finalized, would have been in what appears to this map on page 17, which again, I'm not 100% sure that this is still the most accurate information because what we've been using in the office is completely different, which totally changes people's land value. I mean, if Duru's felt that they could go and subdivide that into 3 acre lots, then maybe they wouldn't even be talking solar. But the difference is that's not what, the applicant was using as, and so, I wish I came into this and had all the time to have everything perfect, but this is one of those inconsistencies in our documents that primarily sit on a shelf like most plans do compared to what we implement every day. And what we implement every day was what was on my shelf that was told to me was the plan, both comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. And That is not reflected on this. And so
The
applicant's
map's,
finding why
the
they're.
map's not reflected, but the verbiage is.
Yeah, and so was there a verbiage change is also the question. Was there possibly, and I'm gonna have to go back and do some research on that, whether it changes a whole lot for the decision, it doesn't. Only thing it would change would be the mitigation. And that's obviously key and very extremely important. It's part of the approval. So, but now knowing this, I will go back and look, but then that's a sit down between, Muir and myself. I mean, county obviously has the final decision, but you could say, according to this, and whether we believe should be, if it changed at any point, we can still say we don't want to include that area.
Well,
And still cover potentially what might have changed down the road, but this would still say, we're not gonna include that area. And how many acres is it? From what Duver's actually own, and then where it might potentially be what they will further acquire to get to the number that they need to. It's probably a small portion of the mitigation habitat area that they would need to work on.
Well, the full
No more than
lot.
probably 100 acres.
Well, see, the lot itself is 320 acres, but it's only a portion of that is actually in the zoning of rural residential.
And that's
Like
what
you said about.
I wish I.
Right.
And we can next break we take, I'll go look and I'll try to figure out what that
Okay.
total accurate number would be. Obviously unsurveyed, but a decent rendition of what that would be.
So just to be clear, when you guys see us talking amongst ourselves, we can't talk amongst ourselves outside of this door. It would violate,
Public meeting laws.
public meeting laws. That's why we're having these discussions amongst ourselves. It's not like we've totally lost our mind. Moving on page 153 of the comprehensive plan under rural residential parcels 1 and 2. The paragraph, the next to last paragraph isn't numbered. It says, unmeasurable means that of a man's desire for tranquility and open space and the amenities of rural living must also be considered. Because of the county's basically rural lifestyle, all housing needs will not be met within Lakeview's urban growth boundary. The county recognizes the desire to continue an existing rural lifestyle which can be accommodated at no expense to commercially viable agricultural land.
That kind of leads you to the opportunity that would, need to be entertained to rezone lands in the future or redesignate them as, say, farm residential. We gotta be careful what we ask for on that too, because
But
trying to
all
protect
these people,
ag land.
all these people in here, that's what they're thinking. I guarantee
well, I'm
you.
just saying, we're trying to
They don't wanna live
protect
in
ag
town.
land, but
Right.
yeah,
But all those guys got a permit
because further.
because of that reason.
And I'm gonna probably try to use that for further non-farm dwellings in the future. There's always, looking back at our plan, existing lots, they absolutely want to allow non-farm dwellings as long as there was no conflict to agriculture. Now, most non-farm dwellings could be looked at as a conflict to agriculture, so,
So
it would just require a goal exception, which is
I guess I'm just
not an easy process.
clarification then from my board, and don't let anyone jump in here. If I'm reading the tea leaves right, and exactly kind of where we're going here, the issue on the proposed solar on this site, and also partly the mitigation being on some of this other land on the other side, is based around the fact that a portion of this is already being proposed in our comprehensive plan as potential residential. But going back to a statement that you said earlier, one of the reasons why most of the people here and most of the folks that are opposed to it. They live out there to be outside the town. So are we looking to deny an application based around the fact that we want to put in homes in a place
Well,
where people all live there because they don't want everyone, a bunch of homes around them?
well, the thing is that
I just don't think that's an
you're
appropriate.
not gonna have, you're not gonna fill 525 acres with homes overnight.
No,
Number two is they have to be 10 acre parcels on the future farm.
correct. So whatever you were to put there, you'd have to break them down
And I
into
guess
parcels.
we'd have to see, would somebody rather look at a neighbor's house or a solar array?
So it's in the plan as a, future potential site. It wasn't proposed. It was adopted as a potential future site, so.
Yeah.
It still would require goal exception, and you'd probably have a whole lot of people opposed to it on, can say to that, I mean, if we're trying, our overall goal is to protect agriculture, putting homes out in that area, it certainly isn't protecting what we're trying to say on one hand is
Yeah, and
prime and productive ag.
I just don't know if we can decide not to cut off this hand to cut off this one necessarily. It's not a logical reason for denial for me.
Well,
Just on that alone, I just
Well,
don't.
the thing
I don't
is
see that.
according to what it says in our comprehensive
Right.
plan, it's just around the Warner Junction area. In other words, you're not gonna cover the whole thing. The whole thing isn't under that.
Correct.
And so,
But a portion of that, what your point is that a portion of that is, and a portion of it is zoned currently as rural residential.
So again, on 153 and 152, this is supplemental findings for exception areas. These findings that you quoted, unmeasurable needs, extending that paragraph on 153 is the reasons that were made for a goal exception for parcels 1 and 2, which again, this I can't identify as parcels 1 and 2, but they were rural residential areas that were accepted by the CDLCD for a goal exception at the time this plan was adopted. So that, that statement, I love it, I think it's great, and it works really well for future goal exceptions for residential purposes, but it was specific to, why parcels 1 and 2 were designated as rural residential at the time of the adoption of this plan. But I
So,
100% agree with you, we will need other areas, and, the planning commission approves non-farm dwellings throughout the valley often, more than most people would like to see. But there are many areas within our already zoned rural residential areas that just haven't been developed. Christian Road is a good example, just north of there off Willow Bridge, which is
Right.
part of this area.
right,
Could be subdivided. I mean, I think the Howard's probably is 150. You have to have willing, sellers and developers to make some of these developments happen. And a lot of our stuff is, you look at Missouri Road and Roberta Road, two primary developers own, what's north of Missouri, as Rabbit Hill starts, and heads north towards prison, south of the existing solar farmland.
and I think it's important to note that rezoning and repurposing agricultural land for residential purposes, you have to make the case for why there isn't, or how there isn't enough or adequate supply of residential land already in existence.
yeah, but
Which is
then
very-
you go back to 215-416. The county may not approve an application if the proposed use of land is found to be in conflict with the comprehensive plan of the county.
But I guess then that would call into question is whether or not it actually is in conflict with the plan or potential use that's built within the plan.
And if you go back to our housing needs analysis, what's still needed, obviously what we're needing, what we've been talking about for economic development, certainly all the jobs we
Right.
can't fill because we don't have adequate housing.
I think it's a very good
you know,
point.
they're, to connect the two, I mean, what Commissioner Williams said is that to justify rezone requires proof that you've used all your other available lands up. And, I mean, the majority of the Christian Road properties, the majority of, you know, stuff off Roberta, off, you know, north of Roberta, you know, stuff south of town, west of town, P Street, South Third, all the way down to Stock Drive. I mean, that's all zone residential. And so you primarily have, you know, a few families that own these big blocks of residential area that haven't been developed yet, or developers themselves. I don't know if it was 5 guys, whichever the development is on Drake and you know, the Grey Goose subdivision. I mean, most of those still haven't been developed, and so
Yeah, if you wanna live in town,
Yeah.
but I don't wanna freaking live in town.
But
And so-
again, like the urban growth boundary isn't necessarily town.
but to get a rezone, you would have to, or redesignation of the comprehensive plan to go to this future need would require that analysis, and they'd have to,
Yes.
the state would overturn a decision that we would have, and they would say, no, you haven't used the supply you already have. And again, our 446, I believe, is the one where the legislative assembly is trying to protect agricultural land from urban sprawl, continual, you know, non-farm dwelling and usage out in those areas. So that's what makes all this very difficult, because I think, you know, a lot of our rural heritage was, you know, we want to protect people's development rights. And so all the existing parcels, there's a part in our plan that says they should be allowed to be approved for home sites. It says that in our, and we've started to use some of that language in our decisions by the planning commission for non-farm dwelling approvals. And I can find the exact page, I think page 12, but, you know, so protecting that right is something that was very well thought of, and for future, you know, home sites, yeah, it makes sense that you would use, you know, the roughest areas for future home sites, because you want to protect the low, wet agricultural lands. And so that's why this Duberoo site was looked at that way, because it's been recognized as a pretty rough part of ground that you know, has a lot of contours which make really good visual home sites.
The thing is that if we allow it, the solar sites, then for a minimum of 35 years, we can't do this.
Correct.
And if it's a conservation easement, like I'm assuming it's going to be, you can never do it.
Yeah, I don't think I could ever, I will not accept a conservation plan that extends beyond the life of the facility, or any project or any development of any kind. Because what that does is
35 years is too long.
well, 35 years is a long time.
We don't have that long, so.
Oh, I might.
You're the only one.
Dang.
Oh, maybe no.
So, yeah. No, I, as I stated earlier on, I went on record in the meeting, I'm against those kind of permanent easements, because what that does is handcuff any future board of commissioners from any kind of leverage or flexibility in doing other projects.
That's a done deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I am completely opposed to long-term conservation easements that could potentially handcuff us and tie our hands on development, even when the development that mitigation was proposed for is no longer in existence. No, it's not a good idea. I'm not gonna touch that with a 10-foot pole.
So, if I may ask, Darwin or Logan, the habitat mitigation plan as proposed right now is 1.8 to 1, is that correct?
Correct.
Does that include Duberoo property only?
No.
What's that?
No,
No, it does not.
it includes some additional land that we plan on signing.
So,
And just as a final point,
if the commissioners were to ask that be bumped to 2 to 1, this would be a factor with what we've discovered here with rural residential, with currently what you're trying to acquire.
I'm not looking at the maps that you are, but we would have to figure that out and find appropriate land.
Do you have the most recent mitigation plan? Because the one that's actually in.
Electronically.
Okay, yeah, right. I just wanted to make sure that you actually have the electronic version, because the one that was in my binder was not the most recent one. I just wanted to make sure that you guys both have that.
ZK.1 is the most current version of the mitigation plan.
Yeah,
Which
and it
was
is still
agreed
one
upon.
point eight in there, I just, there were other changes and things that were different from the original one that was in our binder.
Definitely, yeah, because the binder came in June and the
Correct.
update came in August. So, as it was still getting worked out between the applicant and the FDW.
Well, have to have mitigation plan needs to be solid. It needs to be, it was a goal of mine for it to be a 2-to-1. I don't know about the other commissioners, in order for it to be an approval, until we know this type of information, I don't know that I would be in favor of moving forward until we find this information out.
So I'm using OW's preference and on page 21 of the proposed notice of decision document that was provided to you guys, that talks about in-kind and proximity is the preference and what they use for. And I shouldn't speak for OW, maybe you want clarification from them, but they will still use, whatever ratio you use, then similar areas and in proximity. So they're not gonna go to Klamath County or another county, and they're gonna wanna stay within the valley. Certainly, we took away that, we worked to get them to take away the western portion on the west side of Rabbit Hill Road. My belief is that probably would go into part of the mitigation, but maybe that's not something they want to use. I see John's nodding his head a little bit, but I mean, that was roughly 40 acres that's now added that was going to be solar panels, but now will be part of the mitigation plan. Very, very likely could be, because they're going to own that portion of property anyways. They might as well put it in the plan if they're not going to put the panels on it. So, and then I know from previous, we all know from previous discussion that they are working with at least one other landowner to acquire additional lands to meet their 1.8 to 1 ratio. Again, the difference, we've talked about the acreage difference between 2 and 1.8, and it was, I want to say it was 115, I'll look back at my notes, but it wasn't a whole lot more land, but it's certainly something they will have to consider. And then
Right.
on the next break, if we haven't made a decision by then, I'll go look and see how much this area
Remember, because the applicant was looking to remove this
that's
portion
now
of
would
the
be
site.
added, yeah,
Right.
essentially.
So that actually reduces the actual mitigation and gets them closer to that one, up beyond the 1.8.
Yeah, and I'm not
Maybe not by a
They'd have
lot,
to-
but it's still there.
I'm not sure if
Needs
it's
to be
gonna
factored
reduce
in.
it. I think, I mean,
Does it not reduce it? Okay, no, because
Yeah.
actually,
because they've
I'll correct
infilled
myself,
more.
because you actually are still, they're just basically consolidating that into the rest of the site.
And so they're still affecting a certain.
And I have a little problem by adding that mitigation to the wildlife mitigation, because you could add it to the mitigation, you can't use that for housing.
Right. I think what he's just,
It would be Blue Marmot's property anyway.
For 35 years. I understand what you're saying, Mark. I mean, if it's on the west side of Rabbit Hill Road and that portion that's now Xed out on the map that was provided at the previous hearing, yeah, it'd be part of a mitigation plan. You could put houses on it.
but if they
They would
own
own it
it,
as
if they
part of.
own it,
They wouldn't be
we as
planning to do it.
commissioners don't have any authority
Yeah,
to do
for
anything
35
with their
years.
land anyway. So,
And it would require a partition, it would require a bunch of things that would be difficult to me. I mean, non-farm dwellings get approved in the valley a lot. I've been here 10 years and we haven't denied one yet. Actually, nowhere in the county, I think a final decision by the county was ever for denial on an off-road only, except for one in Valley Falls. But aside from that, you know, that would require a,
Just fix
I
us,
know,
stay on track.
that would require, you know, partition, and all existing lots are looked at as well. It's existing lot according to plan, it should be approved, but new partitions, we every day try to avoid any new partition for a home site, if it's not designated and zoned out.
Okay, going back to the HMP, the habitat mitigation plan, the applicant does state in their record, in their final rebuttal, it says that the habitat mitigation plan is based on site-specific impacts to wildlife and habitat and in-kind, in proximity land available for mitigation. And then they also go on to say, though, that the applicant has agreed to the conditions of approval proposed by ODF&W and the Planning Commission to ensure proper implementation of the habitat mitigation plan, and will have sufficient property interest to meet the required mitigation ratio. So what is the required mitigation ratio? Because we have typically gone with the 2-to-1. That's been kind of a common practice in the past. We've gone higher, we've actually gone 3-to-1, we've gone,
And I believe we've gone 1-to-1.
yeah, we have gone 1-to-1
So-
too, we've gone lower.
If it wasn't mapped habitat, it was a general habitat situation. And that's a determination based upon, the mapping and the categories of the land in which ODF&W has it on their updated maps, not what our goal 5 is, but.
Right.
So they negotiate that primarily outside of these public meetings with the applicant, and then they bring us a proposal.
And they agreed to 1.8.
Yeah, they agreed to 1.8, but that was obviously, you know, similar to when John talks about how, you know, it was a compromise when we adopted the Goal 5 requirements. You know, it was not definitely what ODF&W probably wanted to help protect, to fulfill their goals.
Right,
But
because
it
their
is,
goal
it
is,
is adequate based upon the land.
right,
So
but
they
their goal
agreed.
is 2-to-1. They don't, the ODF&W, not to speak for ODF&W or
Their
anything,
standard is,
but they don't have the authority to demand more than the one.
No, but they get asked for 2-to-1.
Correct, they did ask for it, but they can't demand for it, because that actually by law and statute is at our discretion as a board of commissioners.
yes, we have the final say on that.
Right.
According to the rule as it's written. So, yeah, you guys absolutely could go to, you can go above that. It just, you know,
Right,
the
but
decision you
again,
make
you
needs
don't,
to be based upon
It-
evidence in the record according to what's, you know, the testimony you've heard around this plan or as the plan reads itself.
and it needs to be fair, it needs to be appropriate. And to Commissioner Albertson's point, if you demand too much mitigation, that's that much more land that you're locking up in a mitigation agreement that could be potentially for 35 years at the very least.
But as it stands right now, but Mr. Day stated, the Dubrow property by itself does not meet 1.8-to-1. Correct. So until we know the acreage and the numbers and the details of that, the habitat mitigation plan is in question due to the ratio.
The plan itself isn't just the land that they would actually implement the plan is, but according to, you know, the proposed findings, they would still have to present that plan to you prior to construction. And it would have to be adequate according to a review by ODF&W.
Prior to
And
construction.
again, that's, you know, 15, 16, or 17 on page 38. I'm not gonna read it right now.
Okay, so
One of those 3 areas that were suggested in the letter of August 16th by John Muir.
but see, that's prior to construction, that's not necessarily prior to approval.
Yeah, so the plan's been
Because we
agreed upon,
can-
it's just a matter of where it gets implemented.
Right, but also brings you back to a condition of approval, basically, like this has to be met before
Absolutely.
you can break ground, do this, do such and such.
Absolutely.
And this has to be determined.
By
And we-
law, we can state that approval be done now. We can make any request for approval.
If they haven't acquired the land yet, I mean,
Yeah, see, that's I mean, like the timeline isn't really my concern.
if they could
Their
never,
timeline isn't an issue. For our timeline is basically, okay, we've got our meeting, we have to go through it, and we're going to be thorough.
But we make whatever we determine to be a condition of approval prior to you doing X, Y, and Z, prior to you breaking ground, prior to construction, whenever that might be, this has to be done. I don't care if it takes 10 years. You cannot construct whatever until this is done.
And what we're talking about is just the
Number
acquisition of
17
land, which.
Right.
Yeah, which is, meets the standard of ODF and W as agreed upon in their habitat mitigation plan, which is in kind and in proximity.
Right, and the
So-
reason we do that, and we do that for every land use application, is because it's typically inappropriate to have any kind of an applicant for any particular purpose, have to go through pulling permits and go through all the other things and buying this and doing this and everything else before they even get an approval of a use permit. So typically you go through some of that conditional use permit, before you actually start pulling a lot of those other permits.
Absolutely, most of the conditions have either before or after context to them prior to construction.
Right. And there might be some things that kind of overlap or at least, just kind of mesh in there, which is why you put conditions of approval on it, like get this
And
done.
that's why the
If you
plan
do,
being
you're
adopted
good to go.
itself and not having land yet secured, it's a big deal. But if the plan's been agreed upon and they secure those lands, then they get implemented according to the standard and what everyone's comfortable with.
And the
County
conditions that
ODF and W.
we put in place.
It's been, talked about throughout the hearings, both the planning commission level and this level, that they haven't yet acquired and signed the final I think maybe the testimony was that they haven't put it to pen, but it's close to putting it to pen, and maybe they can give us an update. But regardless, if they couldn't acquire additional lands outside of that RR and outside of, lands that they have an agreement to purchase, the Duru site, if it couldn't get to that scale, the 2-to-1 or 1.8, whatever is agreed upon, then I know their PGE requirement is 50 megawatts, but maybe they have to scale it back and say, well, we could only provide 40 megawatts because we don't have enough other land secured. What this land use approval is for is the maximum they can go to, which is a 50 megawatt site on roughly 575 acres, a project boundary of 610 acres on 2 tax lots that are roughly 1,200 acres, I'm rounding there. But so, if they couldn't get there and they still want to proceed forward with, say, 40 megawatts or whatever the ratio was that they only could acquire lands on, then maybe they build that and then come back with a different application at another location. But this goal exception would still stand, the condition could be met. It's just that they might not be able to acquire, but I think they're probably pretty confident, as well as I would be, that they will acquire that additional land and it will be meeting the standard of in proximity and in kind, which is what the ODF&W standard and part of the mitigation agreement, is saying that they will do.
So going back to something that Commissioner Alverson pointed out earlier on in the meeting then, this mitigation plan does in fact push wildlife out closer to the highway and could potentially even impact or put that wildlife in danger.
So let me just trying to go back over criteria, or not criteria, but comments in the record. I believe they said they would fence the whole entire property,
Correct.
not just where the panels would be located, because that mitigation plan then says no grazing on that land, and and I'm not. What I need clarification. I mean, I don't need it, but you guys would want clarification. Is if we're pushing antelope and other species out towards the highway, is that on a fence that's precluding them from being within that area at all? Like the 7-foot fence with an additional barbed wire
I mean,
above
along
it?
the highway?
Yeah,
Or no,
well,
just-
because of the comment that you made that it's gonna push them towards the highway. If it's fenced all the way to the highway and it excludes the habitat mitigation area, then animals wouldn't be in that area either, no different than they were. They're not gonna be within
Well,
the
then
solar
what's the point
panel
of the,
area.
what's the point of the
Yeah,
mitigation area?
so it's probably not that it's,
And plus, you wouldn't want it up along the highway anyway, because what you would have is migratory patterns
Catch.
coming across, yeah,
Right.
it's just a catch. And then they're just stuck in the center of the road with nowhere to go.
yeah, and so, looking back at the plan, it would be interesting to find out if there's gonna be a fence at all along the highway.
There's an existing fence.
There's an existing fence, 3-wire, not what we would like to cycle,
But-
what it will be around the panels.
Okay, going back to the plan then, what I have in front of us, and maybe this is a point of clarification I can get from the applicant, I know a couple of them are still on Zoom as well. Judging from the plan that I have in front of me, it doesn't look like you are looking to build a fence along Highway 395.
Correct. We would build a fence around the solar site only.
And so that hasn't changed or anything, we're not talking about building a fence around the mitigation area.
So in most cases, there's 1,000 feet to almost 1,700 or 2,000 feet corridor before you get to the highway and beyond the fence. And the lower areas where there's more water, where they were avoiding for a lot of those same reasons. So that's where they have historically gone.
That would probably be more detrimental to them than
That's what I'm
not
saying.
doing anything.
Yeah. I just figured I'd loop in your point forward on that same vein of thought. Contrary to what you might think, I do listen to what you have to say every now and then.
Well, my point is, we can't make a decision due to not knowing what the numbers are. Because we don't know whether if you exclude the rural and residential, until we know those type of numbers, how that meets 1.8 to 1 or not.
I thought we were doing 2.
1.8 and then if we have additional requests to be at 2.
Well, but I'll just go ahead real quick, Darwin, and then I'll let you jump in if you feel so inclined. My understanding, just my very limited experience, is we don't need an okay from them necessarily if we want to have a 2-to-1. If we say it's going to be 2-to-1, it's their responsibility to find a way to meet that 2-to-1 mitigation. If they can't meet the 2-to-1 mitigation, they have to decrease their footprint of their facility, and they have, I mean and it has to be in kind and in proximity. So if we say 1.8 is acceptable, we say 1.8 to 1. If the land that they're attempting to purchase, and by their own testimony, by the applicant's testimony, they believe they can currently meet, they have to do it, but they have to exclude that rural residential section from the land that they're potentially looking to utilize. And we can state that as a condition of approval. I think that you could still make a decision, but you could, and it just has to be clear what our requirements and our intent is within it. And then the responsibility is on them to meet our requirements. And if they don't meet it, then they can't build. I think, I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, Darwin, Mr. Bailey, if you want to jump in on that, that's how I've kind of viewed the approval of mitigation agreements in the past.
Yeah, they can't exceed what is being proposed, but they could certainly scale it down.
Correct.
So that's why if we agree to 2-to-1 or 1.8, that's the main agreement along with the plan. And then if they secure the additional lands that they need to get to whatever is agreed upon, then that would be part of the approval. But again, all that has to be done and agreed to by us and ODF&W before construction would begin. Which I anticipate wouldn't be that far out. It'd be well prior to construction. And to their projected start of construction date.
I guess in my mind, I never thought about building less.
Yeah.
I don't think they don't intend to build less, and I believe they'll fully secure what they need. Paul, are you wanting to?
Can the applicant ask just a quick clarifying question?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, I'll allow for a question.
Thank you. So just trying to understand this rural residential area, I was hoping we could turn to a figure in Appendix A figure 4, which is the zoning map.
Okay.
And just trying to understand, are you saying that this rural residential, is it a zoning district or a comp plan designation?
It's common.
Okay, got it, thank you. And then is it, I guess, Carmen, maybe this is something offline, but just to figure out kind of where exactly that is, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure we were aware of that.
Yeah, the map is in our comprehensive plan. Was there a particular figure you wanted us to look at in Appendix A?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, it's figure 4, which was the zoning map, that obviously was appended to the application, and this is the zoning data, that we did get from the county, although Dawn, I know you told us that, you kind of received that zoning data and fits and starts, and, but this was the best zoning data we had on hand.
And
But
again,
if we're talking about a comp plan designation, then figure 4 is kind of irrelevant.
they're different, but
Good, thank you.
anywhere, just refresh me, anywhere in your guys' figures, is there a reference to the comprehensive plan or map?
Not in the maps, not in the figures, no, we were very much, we were concentrating on zoning districts. So no, not in Appendix A, on maps.
And that's why, even looking at page 17, there are, if you're not looking at your any bit word, it can look like an 8. R and A don't look that much different. They do if you look further out where other A letters are, but again,
Right. But,
it's an oversight that.
so according to this zoning map, and maybe the maps aren't exactly perfect, but the Lake County zoning map on this one that the applicant just pointed out, figure 4, A1, exclusive farm use, is entirely on the east side of 395. According to the maps that they have provided to us.
The old Chandler property.
Right.
Although the maps might not show the comprehensive plan, in the comprehensive plan, it verbally tells you
Right.
they're in there. That's how I found it on the map.
And so this is, another error, that we wanna make sure that we have some clarification on to make sure that we're following all of our own rules as well. I don't mean to cut us off or anything. I think we're having some really good discussion, really good, topics back and forth and some good thoughts. Do we want to break for lunch? I want to be mindful of everyone's palates. Not you, Kevin.
Oh.
Sorry.
I think we should balance it and be done.
You want to continue?
Yep.
Commissioner Schoenberger?
Yeah, here.
Okay. We'll continue. So, other thoughts?
I would need to know, I'm just restating, I would need to know some of these numbers before I could move forward. I'm not gonna approve a plan that's, I don't know.
So with that statement, are you suggesting a continuance so that we can go over some of the numbers, or if you?
I don't know if somebody has, if one of the other commissioners has other points.
Do you want me to excuse myself and go check some of the numbers on what,
Want to take another
Portion of
just
this
a short
RR
recess
is-
of 5-10 minutes?
something more like that? It won't take me long to figure out what that map says, and I can also pull the books off the shelf and show you what I was using, what the applicant got from us as both the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance.
Again, we're not asking for additional information or
No,
new
it's just
information, we're just
clarification.
clarifying the data and everything that we have in front of us right now. So. Is that,
Do remotely.
We will recess, for 10 minutes. We'll reconvene at 1:20.